The raging waters of the Laramie River roared like an angry beast as Tabitha Vance watched her wedding dress disappear beneath the churning surface, the delicate white lace swirling away like a ghost in the mist. She stood frozen at the riverbank, her hands trembling, torn between the urge to dive after it and the knowledge that the current would likely claim her too. "Leave it. Keep your life with me." The deep voice behind her cut through the sound of rushing water. Tabitha whirled around, her soaked hair slapping against her face. Preston McKenzie sat atop his dappled gray stallion, his weathered hat pulled low over his eyes, but not low enough to hide the intensity of his gaze. The spring of 1873 had brought the worst flooding the Wyoming territory had seen in decades. Tabitha had been fleeing from a wedding, from a man, from a life that wasn't hers to choose when the waters rose too quickly, and swept away the bridge she needed to cross, along with her satchel containing the cursed wedding gown. "I don't need your charity, Mr. McKenzie," Tabitha said, her voice betraying the quiver of cold and fear she tried to suppress. Preston dismounted with the easy grace of a man who'd spent most of his life in the saddle. "It ain't charity, Miss Vance. It's common sense. That dress ain't worth dying for. My father will kill me when he discovers I've run away," she whispered, watching the last glimpse of white silk vanish downstream. "And Jeremiah Harris will hunt me to the ends of the earth." "Your father's a cruel man, and Harris is no better," Preston said, removing his coat and draping it over her shoulders. "The way I see it, that river just did you a favor. No proof of the wedding that never happened." Tabitha clutched the coat around her shoulders, breathing in the scent of leather, tobacco, and prairie sage. "Where would I go? I've got nothing now." Preston's expression softened slightly. "My ranch is 3 miles west, my sister's there. You'd be safe until you figure things out." The offer hung between them like a lifeline. Tabitha had known Preston McKenzie only in passing. He sold horses to her father's ranch and occasionally delivered supplies to town. He was nothing like the wealthy businessman her father had arranged for her to marry. Preston was rough-hewn, a man shaped by the harsh realities of frontier life, not the genteel society her father aspired to join through her marriage. Yet there was something in his eyes that spoke of honesty, a quality that had been sorely lacking in her life. "Why would you help me?" she asked. "Because no one should be forced to marry against their will," he replied simply, then added with the ghost of a smile, "and because you've got more courage than most men I know, running away like you did." Tabitha took a deep breath. The path ahead was uncertain, but behind her lay only misery and subjugation. "Very well, Mr. McKenzie, I accept your offer." Preston nodded and helped her mount his horse before climbing up behind her. As they rode away from the swollen river, Tabitha felt something unexpected. Not just relief at her narrow escape, but a flutter of something new possibility. The McKenzie ranch was modest compared to her father's sprawling estate, but there was an undeniable warmth to it that Tabitha noticed immediately. The main house was constructed of sturdy logs with a wide porch that wrapped around one side. Several outbuildings dotted the property, and a corral held half a dozen horses that lifted their heads curiously as Preston and Tabitha approached. "Preston, we were worried with the flooding," a woman's voice called out as they rode into the yard. Tabitha saw a young woman hurrying toward them, her dark hair pinned back beneath a simple bonnet, her dress practical but well kept. "This is my sister, Margaret," Preston said as he dismounted and helped Tabitha down. "Maggie, this is Miss Tabitha Vance." Margaret's eyes widened slightly. "Edmund Vance's daughter, the one who was to be married today to Jeremiah Harris." Tabitha nodded, suddenly ashamed of her bedraggled appearance. "The river took her wedding dress," Preston explained briefly, and nearly took her with it. Understanding dawned on Margaret's face. "You ran away," she said, not unkindly. "Well, come inside before you catch your death. We'll get you into some dry clothes." The inside of the McKenzie home was modest but comfortable, with handmade furniture and colorful quilts that added warmth to the rooms. A fire burned in the stone hearth, and the smell of stew simmering made Tabitha's empty stomach growl. "I'll fetch you something to wear," Margaret said. "You look to be about my size." Left alone with Preston, Tabitha suddenly felt awkward. "Your sister seems kind." "Maggie's the best person I know," Preston replied, hanging his hat on a peg near the door. "Our parents died of fever 5 years ago. We've been running this place together ever since." "I'm sorry about your parents," Tabitha said softly. Preston nodded his acknowledgement. "How long have you been planning to run away?" The question caught her off guard. I wasn't. Not really. This morning, as I was getting dressed for the ceremony, I looked at myself in the mirror and suddenly couldn't breathe. I couldn't imagine a life with Jeremiah Harris, a man who sees me as nothing more than a possession, a way to gain my father's land and connections. She twisted her hands together. "So I took the dress, some money I'd saved, and I ran. I thought I could make it to Cheyenne, maybe find work there." "Harris won't take kindly to being left at the altar," Preston warned. "And your father?" "My father will be furious," Tabitha acknowledged. "He's invested everything in this match. Our ranch hasn't been doing well these past few years." "I'd heard that," Preston said, "though Edmund Vance is too proud to admit it." Margaret returned with a simple blue dress and undergarments. "You can change in my room," she said, leading Tabitha down a short hallway. Once alone, Tabitha stripped off her sodden clothes with shaking hands. The blue dress was simpler than anything she'd worn in years, but it was clean and dry, and at that moment, it felt like the finest gown in the world. When she emerged, Preston was setting the table while Margaret ladled stew into bowls. The normality of the scene struck Tabitha with unexpected force. This was a home, not just a house where people slept and ate. The difference was subtle but profound. "Feel better?" Margaret asked. "Much, thank you," Tabitha replied, self-consciously smoothing the borrowed dress. "Sit and eat," Preston said. "Everything seems clearer on a full stomach." The stew was hearty and delicious, and Tabitha realized she was ravenous. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Margaret spoke. "So what's your plan now?" Tabitha set down her spoon. "I don't know. I hadn't thought beyond getting away." "You're welcome to stay here until you figure things out," Margaret offered, glancing at her brother, who nodded in agreement. "That's very kind, but I wouldn't want to put you in danger. My father has connections with the territorial judge and Jeremiah. He's not a man who accepts defeat gracefully." Preston's expression darkened. "I've heard stories about Harris and his temper, especially with women." "The stories are true," Tabitha said quietly. "That's part of why I couldn't go through with it." "Then you definitely can't go back," Margaret stated firmly. "I've been saving to buy more breeding stock," Preston said after a thoughtful pause. "I could spare enough for a stagecoach ticket to Denver. You might find work there, and it's far enough that your father and Harris would have a hard time finding you." Tabitha was overwhelmed by the generosity of these virtual strangers. "Why would you do that for me?" Preston's eyes met hers across the table. "Because it's the right thing to do." Those simple words resonated deeply with Tabitha. In her world of calculated marriages and business arrangements disguised as social connections, the concept of doing something simply because it was right seemed almost foreign. "I can work," she said suddenly. "I can cook and clean. I can help with the horses my father never approved, but I've always loved riding and I know a fair bit about them." "We could use the help," Margaret admitted. "Spring's a busy time, and we're short-handed since 2 of our ranch hands left for the gold fields last month." Preston considered this. "It would be safer than sending you off alone, at least for a while until the worst of the search dies down." "Then it's settled," Margaret said with a decisive nod. "Tabitha stays and works for her keep." The arrangement seemed perfect, but Tabitha couldn't shake a nagging worry. "What will you tell people in town? Someone is bound to recognize me eventually." "We rarely go into town," Preston explained. "And when we do, we can say you're a cousin from back east, come to help after hearing about our hands leaving." It was a simple plan, perhaps too simple, but it was the best they had. As night fell, Tabitha lay on a trundle bed in Margaret's room, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch so different from the grand house she'd grown up in. Despite the uncertainty of her future, she felt strangely at peace. The next morning, Tabitha woke to the sounds of a working ranch, a rooster crowing, horses nickering, and the low voices of Preston and another man talking outside. For a moment she was disoriented, then memory flooded back, the river, her escape, the Mackenzies' kindness. She dressed quickly in another of Margaret's dresses and found her way to the kitchen where Margaret was kneading dough. "Good morning," Margaret greeted her. "Sleep well." "Better than I expected," Tabitha admitted. "How can I help?" Margaret seemed pleased by the offer. "You can feed the chickens when I'm done with this bread, then I'll show you around properly." Over the next few days, Tabitha fell into the rhythm of ranch life. She rose with the sun, helped Margaret with household chores, and gradually took on more responsibilities. To her surprise, she enjoyed the physical work. It left her pleasantly tired at day's end and allowed little time for worrying about her father and Jeremiah Harris. Preston kept his distance initially, seemingly uncertain how to interact with her outside of necessary conversation. But Tabitha often felt his eyes on her as she worked, and sometimes caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. A week into her stay, Preston approached her as she was hanging laundry. "You've taken to ranch life well," he observed. Tabitha smiled, pushing a strand of hair from her face. "It's harder work than I was raised for, but more satisfying. I'm heading to the north pasture to check on some newborn foals. Would you like to come along?" Margaret mentioned you know horses. The invitation surprised and pleased her. "I'd like that very much." Preston saddled a gentle mare for her, and they rode out together across the rolling grassland that made up the Mackenzie ranch. Spring had turned the landscape a vibrant green, dotted with wildflowers that swayed in the breeze. "It's beautiful here," Tabitha said, breathing deeply. "So open and free," Preston nodded. "That's why my father chose this land, said a man could breathe out here." "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was," Preston agreed. "Taught me everything important, how to work hard, deal fair, and respect the land and those who share it." "My father taught me that appearance and social position are everything," Tabitha said with a touch of bitterness. "And that a daughter's primary value lies in whom she marries." Preston frowned. "No disrespect intended, but your father's wrong." Tabitha looked at him, surprised by his bluntness. "A woman's value is in her heart, her mind, and her spirit," he continued, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "Same as a man's." The words were simple but profound, and Tabitha felt something shift inside her, a recognition of truth that had been denied her all her life. They crested a small hill, and below them, in a sheltered meadow, several mares grazed with their foals. Preston dismounted and helped Tabitha down, his hands strong and sure at her waist. For a moment they stood close, and Tabitha felt a flutter of awareness that had nothing to do with fear or uncertainty. The moment passed as Preston stepped back. "Come meet the newest additions to the ranch." The foals were spindly-legged and curious, staying close to their mothers but venturing forth to investigate the visitors. One particularly bold colt approached Tabitha, sniffing her outstretched hand before allowing her to stroke his velvety nose. "He likes you," Preston said, a rare smile softening his features. "He's beautiful," Tabitha replied, entranced by the foal's trust. "What will you call him?" Preston considered the colt. "Traditionally, I'd name him based on his sire and dam, but since you found a connection with him, perhaps you should name him." The gesture touched her. "Freedom," she said without hesitation. "His name is Freedom." Preston's smile deepened. "A fitting name." They spent an hour among the horses, Preston explaining his breeding program and future plans for the ranch. Tabitha listened with genuine interest, asking questions that surprised him with their insight. On their return ride, they took a longer route that skirted the edge of Preston's property. As they approached a stand of cottonwoods, Preston suddenly reined in his horse, his body tensing. "What is it?" Tabitha asked, alarmed by his change in demeanor. Riders coming, he said grimly. 3 of them. Get into those trees. Fear coiled in Tabitha's stomach as she urged her mare into the shelter of the cottonwoods. Preston followed, dismounting quickly and helping her down. Stay here, he instructed, tying both horses securely. Keep quiet. From their hiding place, they watched as 3 mounted men approached along the road that ran past Preston's property. With a jolt of terror, Tabitha recognized them, her father's foreman and 2 ranch hands. They're searching for me, she whispered. Preston nodded grimly. Stay down. The men rode slowly, scanning the landscape. They were close enough that Tabitha could hear snippets of their conversation. Waste of time. Girl's probably halfway to Denver by now. Harris is offering $100 reward. Vance is fit to be tied. Tabitha trembled, both from fear and from the realization that her father had indeed sent men to hunt her down like a runaway slave. Preston's hand found hers, his grip reassuring. The riders passed without spotting them, continuing down the road toward town. Even after they were out of sight, Preston kept them hidden for another 10 minutes before deeming it safe to move. They'll be back, he said as they mounted up. And next time they might come to the ranch house. I've put you and Margaret in danger, Tabitha said, guilt washing over her. I should leave. No, Preston said firmly. Leaving now would be more dangerous. We need a better plan. When they returned to the ranch, they found Margaret anxiously waiting for them. Thank goodness, she said when they rode into the yard. Jeremiah Harris and 2 of his men were here looking for Tabitha. Preston dismounted quickly. What did you tell them? That I hadn't seen her, of course. I said I'd heard she might have taken the stage to Cheyenne. Harris didn't believe me, but he couldn't prove otherwise. He threatened to come back with the sheriff. Did he search the house? Tabitha asked, her heart pounding. No, but he wanted to. I told him he'd need a warrant for that. Margaret's voice was steady, but Tabitha could see the fear behind her brave front. Preston's expression hardened. This changes things. Harris has no legal right to search for you. You're not his wife, and being a runaway bride isn't a crime, but with your father's influence, he might convince the sheriff otherwise. What can we do? Tabitha asked. Preston was silent for a long moment, his brow furrowed in thought. There's a line shack about 15 miles from here, up in the foothills. It's isolated, hard to find unless you know where to look. You'd be safe there while we figure out a more permanent solution. I can't ask you to go to such lengths. You're not asking, Preston interrupted. I'm offering. The intensity in his eyes silenced her objections. This was no longer just about doing the right thing. Something deeper had developed between them over the past week, an understanding, a connection, perhaps even the beginnings of something more. I'll prepare some supplies, Margaret said, breaking the moment. You'll need to leave before dawn. The rest of the day passed in tense preparation. Preston cleaned his rifle and checked the tack for the horses while Margaret packed food, clothing, and necessities. Tabitha helped where she could, all the while fighting the growing sense that she was destroying these good people's lives. As dusk fell, Preston pulled her aside. We should talk about what happens next. They sat on the porch, the evening breeze carrying the scent of prairie flowers. For a long moment, neither spoke. I can't keep running forever, Tabitha finally said. And I can't hide in your line shack indefinitely, Preston nodded. I've been thinking. Harris can't force you to marry him, no matter what agreement he had with your father, but he's a proud man with a mean streak. He won't give up easily. What are you suggesting? Preston looked at her directly. What if you were already married to someone else? Tabitha's breath caught. What? If you were legally married to another man, Harris would have no claim on you whatsoever. The implication hung in the air between them. Tabitha's heart raced. Are you proposing marriage, Mr. McKenzie? Preston's usually stoic expression softened. It wouldn't be a real marriage, not at first, just a legal protection. You'd stay at the line shack until things cooled down, then we could figure out what comes next. It was a practical solution, but Tabitha couldn't help feeling a twinge of disappointment. I see. Preston must have heard something in her voice because he reached for her hand. Tabitha, I'm not good with words, but this past week, getting to know you, I've come to respect you. More than that, I've come to care for you. Under different circumstances, I might have courted you properly." The admission, halting and sincere, touched her deeply. "And I've come to care for you as well," she confessed. "You and Margaret have shown me kindness when I needed it most." "Then will you consider it? A marriage of convenience that might, in time, become something more." Tabitha thought of her options. She could keep running, always looking over her shoulder. She could return to her father and submit to his will. Or she could take this chance, a marriage based on mutual respect and the promise of growing affection. "Yes," she said finally, "I'll marry you, Preston McKenzie." Relief and something like joy crossed his face. He squeezed her hand. "We'll ride to Judge Wilson's place tomorrow morning. He's a fair man who knows me well. He'll perform the ceremony without asking too many questions. What about Harris and my father? Once the marriage is legal, we'll send word to them. Then you'll stay at the Line Shack for a few weeks while things settle. I'll visit when I can." It wasn't the romantic proposal Tabitha had dreamed of as a young girl, but it was honest and offered something she valued more than romance: freedom and the chance at real happiness. They left before first light, taking a circuitous route to avoid being seen. Judge Wilson lived on a small homestead outside of town, and as Preston had predicted, he asked few questions when they requested he marry them immediately. The ceremony was brief and simple. Tabitha wore one of Margaret's best dresses, a dove gray with delicate embroidery around the collar. Preston had shaved and wore a clean shirt beneath his best coat. Margaret stood as witness, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Do you, Preston James McKenzie, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Judge Wilson's voice was solemn in the quiet of his parlor. "I do," Preston replied, his eyes never leaving Tabitha's face. "And do you, Tabitha Ann Vance, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Tabitha felt a strange calm settle over her. "I do." "Then by the authority vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, I pronounce you husband and wife." The judge smiled kindly. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. McKenzie." Preston looked momentarily startled, as if he hadn't considered this part of the ceremony. Then he leaned forward and placed a gentle, almost hesitant kiss on Tabitha's lips. It lasted only seconds, but Tabitha felt it like a promise of respect, of care, perhaps someday of love. Judge Wilson's wife served them cake and coffee afterward, chatting amicably about the spring weather and her garden plans. Tabitha marveled at the normality of it. She had just appended her entire life, yet here they were, discussing tulip bulbs as if nothing extraordinary had happened. They left with the marriage certificate safely tucked in Preston's coat pocket. Instead of returning to the ranch, they rode directly to the Line Shack, following game trails and dry creek beds to avoid leaving an obvious trail. The Line Shack was small but solidly built, with a single room containing a bed, a table with 2 chairs, a wood stove, and simple cupboards. Preston had arranged for Margaret to bring supplies earlier in the week, and the tiny cabin was well stocked with food, water, firewood, and even a few books. "It's not much," Preston said, watching Tabitha's face as she took in her temporary home. "It's perfect," she replied, and meant it. The small cabin represented safety and a chance to determine her own future. What more could she ask for? Preston helped bring in the additional supplies they'd brought, then stood awkwardly by the door. "I should get back to the ranch. I'll come check on you in a couple of days, sooner if there's trouble." Tabitha nodded, suddenly shy in the presence of her new husband. "Thank you, Preston." "For everything." He hesitated, then stepped forward and took her hands in his. "I meant what I said before. This may have started as a practical arrangement, but I hope, in time—" "So do I," she whispered. He squeezed her hands gently, then was gone, the sound of his horses' hoofbeats fading into the distance. Alone in the little cabin, Tabitha explored her surroundings more thoroughly. Despite its rustic nature, the shack was clean and surprisingly comfortable. Margaret had included little touches to make it more homelike: a colorful quilt on the bed, a small vase with wildflowers on the table, a jar of honey with the breakfast supplies. The reality of her situation slowly sank in. She was married. She had a husband. Not the one her father had chosen, but one she had chosen herself. The freedom of that choice filled her with a quiet joy. 3 days passed before Preston returned. Tabitha had settled into a simple routine, reading, keeping the cabin tidy, and taking short walks in the surrounding area. She was standing at the small stove, stirring a pot of beans, when she heard a horse approaching. Relief flooded through her when she recognized Preston dismounting outside. When he entered, she was struck by how right it felt to see him there, in the space that had become hers. "How are you faring?" he asked, removing his hat. "Well enough," she replied. "Any news?" Preston's expression grew serious. "Harris came to the ranch again, this time with the sheriff. I showed them our marriage certificate. Harris was displeased, and my father, he was there too. Called you ungrateful, threatened to disown you." Preston's jaw tightened. "I told him you were my wife now, and he had no say in your life anymore." Tabitha felt a strange mixture of pain and liberation. And how did they take that? Not well. But legally, there's nothing they can do. Preston moved closer, his expression softening. "You're safe, Tabitha. They know you made your choice." Tears welled in her eyes, not of sadness, but of relief. "Thank you." Preston reached out hesitantly and brushed a tear from her cheek. The gentle touch sent a warmth through her that had nothing to do with gratitude. "I brought something for you," he said, reaching into his coat. He pulled out a small leather-bound book. "Margaret thought you might be getting bored with the few books we had here." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched her deeply. As she took the book, their fingers brushed, and something electric passed between them. Their eyes met, and Tabitha saw in Preston's gaze a hunger that matched the one growing in her own heart. "Preston," she whispered, "when we married, we spoke of a union that might, in time, become something more." He nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "We did. I find that I don't want to wait for in time." Tabitha gathered her courage. "These past weeks have shown me who you truly are, a good, honorable man who respects me as a person, not a possession. I think I'm falling in love with you." The admission hung in the air between them. Preston's expression shifted from surprise to wonder to a joy so pure it transformed his entire face. "Tabitha," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I fell in love with you the moment I saw you standing by that river, soaked to the skin but still defiant, still fighting for your freedom." He closed the distance between them, taking her face gently between his calloused hands. "I never dared hope you might come to feel the same." This time when they kissed, there was nothing hesitant about it. It was a seal on a promise, the beginning of something true and lasting. Later, as they sat at the small table sharing the dinner Tabitha had prepared, Preston spoke of the future. "I think it's safe for you to come back to the ranch now. Harris has left town, and your father seems to have accepted the situation, even if he's not happy about it." "I'd like that," Tabitha said. "I've missed Margaret and the horses." Preston smiled. "Freedom asks about you. That colt seems to know you're his special friend." Tabitha laughed, a sound of pure happiness. "Tell him I'll be back soon to continue his education." "I was thinking," Preston said, his expression turning serious again, "that maybe we could build onto the house. Add a couple of rooms, make it a proper home for a family." The implication made Tabitha's heart skip. "A family," Preston reached across the table for her hand. "If you want that." "With me, I do," she said, echoing her wedding vows with deeper understanding. "Very much." The next morning, they rode back to the ranch together. As they crested the final hill and saw the McKenzie homestead below, Tabitha felt a surge of emotion. This was home now, not because fate or her father's decree had placed her here, but because she had chosen it for herself. Margaret welcomed them with open arms and happy tears, and even the ranch hands tipped their hats respectfully to Mrs. McKenzie. That evening, as the three of them sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Tabitha thought about the river that had taken her wedding dress. That loss, which had seemed so catastrophic at the time, had led her here to freedom, to family, to love. "What are you thinking about?" Preston asked softly, noticing her contemplative expression. About how losing something can sometimes lead to finding something far more precious, she replied, leaning against his shoulder. Preston's arm encircled her, drawing her closer. The river took your wedding dress downstream, he murmured, but it brought you to me instead. And you said, leave it, keep your life with me, Tabitha remembered, looking up at the man who had become not just her rescuer or her husband, but her partner and her love. Best advice I ever gave, Preston said with a smile, pressing a kiss to her forehead as the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. In the years that followed, the McKenzie ranch prospered. Preston and Tabitha added those rooms onto the house, filling them with the laughter of children and the warmth of family gatherings. Margaret married a schoolteacher from town, building her own home on a corner of the ranch property. Freedom grew into a magnificent stallion who sired many of their finest horses. And each spring, when the Laramie River swelled with melting snow, Tabitha would stand on its banks and offer a silent thanks to the waters that had carried away an unwanted future and delivered her into the arms of true love.